Welcome back, everyone, to the weekly Armchair Sports Talk. This is our Manchester United podcast. This is Devil's Advocate. I'm back on the show here today after my long hiatus on the channel. Absolutely delighted to be back. My colleague beside me, Marc, has been holding the fort for about 6 weeks now. So look, glad to be back here on the show today. So myself and Marc are joined by a very distinguished guest here today. We are joined by Connor, Norwich City journalist. We're here to talk all things Manchester United. Here to talk all things Norwich City as well. We're here to talk about the game this Saturday. We're also going to chat about Connor's background in reporting on Norwich City and also other Man United related topics as well here in the podcast as well, guys. Look, do smash that like button, hit the subscribe button, though we do really appreciate your support. Connor, first of all, welcome to the show. Glad to have you on. First of all, to kind of give our kind of Man United related viewers kind of a background kind of on yourself, I understand you do report a lot on Norwich City for multiple different outlets, and just talk to our viewers first of all kind of how that started and kind of how you got into reporting on football.
Yeah, thank you for having me first and foremost. It's lovely to be here. My journey into my job is maybe not quite as conventional as maybe other people. So I got the job that I have now when I was 19. So I'm 22 now. So it was a couple of years ago. It was during the last time Norwich City were in the Premier League, and I actually came from kind of a fan site kind of background. So similar thing to what you guys were doing, really. I produced a similar podcast around Norwich City. We had some interviews at the time of ex-players. There was a notable one with Stuart Webber, who's obviously the sporting director at Norwich City. And that's really how I started and kind of fell into writing, fell into doing podcasts, fell into doing videos, really loved it. Kept working hard at it, and eventually an opportunity arose at the Eastern Daily Press, Norwich Evening News, Pinken, which is kind of the local newspaper here in Norfolk. And I applied thinking really that I probably wouldn't get it. And obviously, fortunately enough, I must have interviewed okay because here I am. So that's kind of my route into it. It's kind of the university NCTJ route, but it's a different one. It's worked for me, and I really love the job, even though it's a bit up and down with Norwich City, as you can expect. It's really enjoyable. So that's my background, really. I was a Norwich fan growing up. I had a season ticket actually until the start of that Premier League season. So I pretty much I went to the game before my first game in the role. You guys may remember it was the 3-2 victory over Manchester City that Norwich had. So that was my first game. So I'm never going to forget that. And ever since then I've been reporting on them, and obviously with the events that's gone on in the world, it's been a little bit strange at times, but I've loved every second of it. So really looking forward to the trip to Old Trafford. I went 2 years ago, and the result and the game wasn't particularly great from a Norwich perspective. So I'm hoping it's a little bit more competitive this time around.
You might be in for a treat this weekend. United's form is obviously terrible, so you might be looking forward to this one. Come out with your head held high at least.
Yeah, I hope so. I think it's really interesting because United aren't in a good place. Norwich, I know they beat Burnley at the weekend and got a draw against Brighton. So you look at it as 4 points in the last two games, but prior to that, looked aside absolutely doomed. So and still are really 7 points behind Everton with 7 to go. That's quite a gap to make up. So yeah, it feels like it's a game between maybe two of the out of form sides in the division and two teams really lacking confidence. So how exactly that pans out on Saturday and what sort of game we're going to get off the back of that, I'm not quite sure.
It's one of them because last weekend when we were watching the Everton game and we done our own previews on our two podcasts that we have, we were probably saying that they're the two most out of form teams in the league, obviously, because the way Everton have been playing, the way United have been playing, it's just been it's been unusual to kind of see us play this bad at this moment in time. So like, I'll be honest, I know we'll delve into the chat about kind of the game itself and kind of how we're feeling, but it's one of these times where in the last kind of decade post-Fergie, it's probably the only time that when Norwich have come to Old Trafford, I can genuinely say they can most definitely get something, regardless of the form we are. And I think, Man United fans, would have their doubts about a result in the weekend, just considering the form kind of over the last 3 to 4 weeks. Connor, you mentioned obviously, like, look, you're reporting on kind of Norwich City, and you've been covering them for quite some time now. Obviously, there's been a lot of change in the last 12 months at Norwich. Obviously, Daniel Farke has been there for quite some time, and who's brought Norwich up in the Premier League, but also down, but also back up. And then obviously Dean Smith's come in kind of the last 12 months or so. When you look at kind of Daniel Farke and Dean Smith, kind of what's changed in Norwich City, and kind of in terms of the direction of the football club, but also the style of play?
Yeah, I think the style of play is a massive point, really, because Norwich City have transitioned from a team that wanted to be possession based in every single game. It was quite ideological the way Daniel Farke used to play, irrespective of opponent. He used to kind of set his teams up to get on the ball, to attack teams, to have a go. That's why Norwich got labelled as being naive by quite a few people at various points. They played that way when they got thumped 7-0 at Chelsea, for example, which is the result earlier in this season that really maybe put the idea inside Stuart Webber's head and the people who matters head about potentially making a change. And I think Smith has came in and maybe been a bit more pragmatic and probably made the football certainly less easy on the eye, but probably more effective. And there's probably a debate to be had around whether this squad is good enough for the Premier League. And I think you only have to look at where Norwich City are in the table and the amount of points that they've amassed this season to maybe answer that question. But undoubtedly Dean Smith has improved them, and I think the numbers show that. I think the concern that fans have maybe over Smith is that there isn't necessarily the same identity present that we saw with Daniel Farke, and that is frustrating fans a little bit, because they go into Norwich City games and not really knowing what to expect from how Norwich are going to play or how they're going to approach it. For me, it feels like he's quite a reactionary coach, and Norwich are maybe adapting to their opponents a lot more than they did under Daniel Farke. And so I think week to week, it's quite difficult to know how they're going to set up and approach games. So the style of play is definitely the big thing. I do feel for Dean Smith a little bit, because he's been in charge since November and he's not signed a single player. And I'd say it's pretty unique, actually, for a manager to, the first player that he signs, when they make their debut, it's going to be over 9 months since he took the job. That's quite a unique position to be in for any head coach. So I feel for him a little bit. He's kind of having to work with what he's got and trying to get a tune out of what he's got at the moment, which isn't the best squad. But in terms of real stark differences, it's definitely Smith wants Norwich to be tighter. He wants them to be more defensively resilient, and they're less easy on the eye, I would say. But that's not necessarily a bad thing given the position that they're in at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you look at the style of play, I think maybe if Norwich are looking at it from this perspective, they probably would have been better off having Dean Smith in since the start of the season. I know Farke had done well in previous spells, obviously in the Premier League and the Championship as well. But if you, as you said, like Norwich have improved defensively in that regard, and their shape seems to be a bit better. Do you maybe think, let's say, for all harm's sake, Norwich do go down, let's say this season, do you think that Dean Smith, given, let's say, the right tools, can maybe get Norwich back up, but also maybe give them a platform to be not the most easiest team on the eye, but maybe, give yourselves kind of that defensive stability that maybe you didn't have under Daniel Farke?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you look at the two teams that came up with Norwich from the Championship last time, one being Brentford, the other being Watford. Brentford in particular, there's kind of a lot of debate in Norwich circles. Norwich finished 10 points above Brentford last season in the Championship, which feels quite remarkable given what they've done this season. And a lot of the discussion from Norwich fans has been, well, why are they so far off, and why do they look so much more equipped to stay in the Premier League than Norwich have this season? And I think a lot of that comes down to the defensive solidity that they have and the structure that they have under Thomas Frank, and they had that last season. And Daniel Farke raised this point as well, to be fair, after Norwich City got relegated from the Premier League last time. He used Sheffield United as an example and said, actually, teams that come up who are a bit more defensively sound, who are a bit more solid, have a better chance of staying in the league in the first season than teams who try and be a bit more expansive. So I think it was maybe a little bit of a surprise when Norwich looked to try and replicate what they did last time in terms of style of play, and hoped that because they felt they had a better squad, it would be better this time. That obviously proved not to be the case, and he eventually fell on his sword. So I think Dean Smith will certainly look at it from through a different lens, and with a different perspective. And I think if Norwich do drop down to the Championship, there will be an onus on how tight can they be defensively. And I mean, as I said to you guys, I'm 22 now, and I can't really recall a Norwich City team beyond one that was managed very early on in my life by Nigel Worthington, that was defensively solid. Norwich have always been pretty loose and given goals away fairly easily. So it does feel like that's going to take a little bit of adjustment, and it's going to take a lot of work. But I think you look at what Dean Smith is and what he's done in his career. He builds clubs. He built Walsall when he was there in League One. He built Brentford. A lot of the foundations he put in place are what we're seeing now in terms of them in the Premier League. And he obviously built up Aston Villa to a stage where it now feels like they could go on and, with Steven Gerrard at the helm, potentially become a top half side. So you only have to look at his body of work over his career to show that in the long term, he does get a tune out of teams. And I think Norwich City are hoping that if it does end in relegation this season, which looks likely, they'll build in the Championship and then be better equipped under Dean Smith, who they feel is a Premier League coach, to stay up next time. The problem is, we've been here before with Norwich City and various coaches that they feel after relegation will keep them up. And no one's been able to do that since Paul Lambert, and that was nearly a decade ago. So, it's going to take a lot of work, I think, for Norwich City to become established, but they feel that Dean Smith is the man to do it.
I just weighed in myself, actually. I thought I was a little bit surprised when Daniel Farke was sacked, actually. I know you were going through a bit of a difficult spell, but I think, he's been at the club, or he was at the club for a number of years, seemed to give them that identity. It was kind of overshadowed by managers such as Frank Lampard and Ollie at the time, I think. But it was a shock to me. Was it a shock to you as well? And do you, obviously, on the back of what you said earlier, I think you think that Dean Smith has obviously done a better job, has given them more of an identity. But were you shocked at that at the time?
Yeah, I was. More so because it came after a win, and it was Norwich's first Premier League win of the season. They went to Brentford. It was just before an international break, actually, in November. And I remember the full-time whistle going. Norwich had just beaten Brentford 2-1. There was Daniel Farke went over to the away end, did kind of the waves that you might have seen or be familiar with. He had a really good connection with supporters. We were kind of putting out the content that we usually put out, getting ready to leave. And then we got word that actually he was going to be removed from his post. So a very quiet international break turned into a very fraught, very busy one in the space of about 10 minutes. And we were camped inside Brentford Stadium with everyone having left the building, preparing to come out. So it was a shock in that regard. I think it probably wasn't a shock in the way that Norwich City had played. And everyone looked at their fixtures and probably felt that it was going to be a really difficult start for them. They had all of the top sides, really excluding Manchester United. They played Liverpool, they played Manchester City. That was their first two games in the league. Leicester were in there, Arsenal were in there, Chelsea were in there. It was extremely difficult, but I think the concerning thing was the nature of their performances and how they were losing games. There was one game in particular at Carrow Road against Leeds where Daniel Farke really abandoned his style and this possession-based football that he became kind of renowned for at Norwich and played a little bit more long ball. And Norwich lost 3-1. They were comprehensively beaten. It was really concerning. There was another 3-1 defeat to Watford in there. And you just got the sense from the performances that he wasn't going to be the man that was going to be able to turn it around. And I think that was probably the most concerning thing. I think when it got to the change, it was probably, if anything, it had arrived a little bit too late rather than there being kind of any shock that decision was made at all. So, Smith has improved them. It was sad. I'd probably use that word for how it ended for Daniel at Norwich. He is a club legend, did unbelievable things, particularly in his second season to win the Championship title with a group of players who had absolutely no right to win it, and did it all on a shoestring budget with his hands tied behind his back a lot of the time. So there's a lot of love for Daniel Farke at Norwich City. There always will be. But now it's kind of Dean Smith's job
I think we just lost you there for the last bit there.
He's back.
Sorry, guys. Yeah, all I said, I think it was Daniel Farke is a club legend at Norwich City, always will be, and now it's Dean Smith's task to take them forward. Whether it's a great escape in the Premier League, which I think everyone agrees looks somewhat unlikely, or another relegation to the Championship.
Yeah, there's definitely them two scenarios there. I think Dean Smith should definitely be given time to rebuild at Norwich. And I think, he has improved, especially if I look at when we played earlier on in the season. he battered us at Carrow Road. We were very lucky to get the result that day. I think Marc would agree. I think we were very lucky to get the result that day. Like I could see improvements in that game when we played yourselves. So I think he definitely should be given time, especially if you look at what he done at Villa, like especially that body of work there, how he got him up from the Premier League, and last season nearly got him Europe. So like he has done well, and I think look, there was a couple of results at Villa that didn't go his way. That look, they probably should have given him a bit of time. Me personally, look at Steven Gerrard. Is he doing great there at the moment? That's up for debate at the moment when you look at recent results. But again, I'd like to see him get time, and let's see if he can get Norwich back up. And if after that, can he keep him up, like you said, like the way Paul Lambert done in recent times. So it'd be interesting to see kind of how that happens. Connor, in regards to current player contracted to Manchester United at the moment is Brandon Williams. He's currently on loan at Norwich City this season. Now, I've only kind of watched a couple of games he's played in, and some games he hasn't done well. In other games, he's actually looked quite good and actually looked decent in your side. In terms of overall for a season for Brandon Williams, how has he got on at Norwich City this season?
Yeah, in many ways, I think you can kind of cut it in half from the change in manager, because I think you look at maybe the players who have benefited under Dean Smith, and Brandon Williams has maybe been the top of that list. He has really, well, Norwich fans have really taken to him because he wears his heart on his sleeve as a player, as you know. He likes to dive into tackles. He is quite full-blooded. He defends well, and I think there's been the biggest compliment I can pay him really is that he's not really looked like a lone player. He's kind of looked like he's been at Norwich City for a few seasons and has really been up for the fight, regardless of the position that they're in. So he's done really well. Norwich fans have really loved having him at the club. I think he's really benefited from it as well. I think maybe for him, the decision is, what does he do next? Does he go back to Manchester United after a season of first team football, or does he look elsewhere? That left back position, which is where he's played for Norwich, really is obviously he's got Luke Shaw and Alex Telles in front of him. That looks difficult to break into, I think, for any young player at the moment. So it feels like he's probably going to be playing Premier League football next season. Hopefully that's with Norwich if they can stay in the Premier League and maybe strike a deal to sign him permanently. But I think if we're being realistic, probably elsewhere. But yeah, I would agree with your assessment. I think there's been some games where he's been absolutely excellent. There was one in particular really early on in the season when Norwich went to the Emirates and he had to defend against Nicolas Pepe, who is obviously a £70 million winger. That is what Arsenal paid to sign him. And he was brilliant that day. There's been some other really encouraging performances as well from him. And yeah, like I say, the biggest compliment you can pay to him is that he hasn't looked like a lone player. He's looked like a permanent Norwich City player. And I think both parties will reflect on it and be really pleased with the move in general. And you can't say that about a lot of Norwich City's recruitment this season. So if you were to rank their signings, I think it'd be somewhere near the top. And what's going to be really intriguing is the fans in the next month or so will be voting for their player of the season. And I've seen a few people suggest that he will be in the top three for that fans vote for. So yeah, I think from Norwich City side, it's only really got good things to say about Brandon Williams and what he's done this season.
That's really good to hear, actually. I think what surprises us all is for us, I think we wanted Brandon to maybe focus on his defensive game a bit more. But do you think that that's improved? And obviously you said under Dean Smith that he's more of a pragmatic manager, and that's probably improved his game a little bit.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think so he's been competing with kind of a Greek international called Dimitris Giannoulis, who in Daniel Farke's system was perfect, really liked to get forward, liked to attack, but couldn't really defend, if we're being honest. He's improved somewhat, I think, since Smith has come in fairness. But I think Dean Smith arrived instantly and kind of went, right, who can I put my hat on that is going to make us really defensively solid? And really from the off selected Brandon Williams. And for a little while, there was a debate between who sort of deserves that left back spot in the long run. And I think over time, Dean Smith and supporters have realised that Brandon Williams is probably that man. And that is largely because, as you say, the defensive side of the game has really improved. There are a couple of times where he gets caught out positionally, but he recovers with an absolutely thumping slide challenge that gets people off their seats. So that goes in his favour quite a lot. But yeah, all in all,
he's never been scrutinised for that at all, is he?
No, not at all. He's full-blooded, but I think fans like that. Often it's a really big tackle that can get people off their seats, can't it? And kind of change the momentum. So, I think Norwich fans have loved having Brandon Williams here. And I think if you ask the vast majority of them if they'd like him to stay longer, I think they'd probably say they would.
That's good from us to hear, because obviously I think one thing for us is in the last 2 years when he got brought up by Solskjaer is he was drifting between right back and left back. He wasn't really nailing down a position. Now, obviously, his better games to United did come at left back as well. And one thing we did like about him is his tenacity, his work rate. He's not afraid to dive into a challenge, and he always shows 100% commitment to bomb on ahead of the winger and get balls into the box. So I'm happy to see that the defensive side of his game is improving at Norwich. And to be fair, you mentioned like Luke Shaw and Alex Telles. If you look at the form of them two this season, they haven't been great by large parts. If you look at the left back position, many United fans are talking about Alvaro Fernandez getting called up at the moment because how poorly those Shaw and Telles have been in some lengths of this season. So it's one, Matt in the comments. I'll come to you in a second, Matt. But like it's one of these things where, look, if Brandon Williams can I wouldn't even be opposed to him not selling him to Norwich, but next season loaning him again, and maybe getting that experience in the Championship next year, which is again, I will even go as far as say is nearly more physically demanding than the Premier League, because the fixture list, and you've 46 games or 44 games in the league, and then you obviously have your cups and stuff like that as well. So I wouldn't be opposed to seeing him getting maybe loaned out for one more season. And again, if it's at Norwich, continuity is very important in a young player's career. So if it's a case where United are maybe looking at the fullback position, especially on Eric Ten Hag, potentially Eric Ten Hag, which we'll touch on in a second, it may be not a bad idea to maybe go in under Dean Smith again and learn a bit more of the defensive side of his game, and then who knows, maybe in 12 months after that, kind of where he can be.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a wider point really, which is that you look at England and they've got loads and loads of right backs coming through, but actually very few left backs. So if he could put in a good run of form, be it with Manchester United, be it with Norwich, be it with another Premier League club, there's an opportunity for him to get into that squad, I feel, and really stake a claim for it. He's still a young lad. I think we all agree that there's clearly talent there. It's just about refining the certain elements of his game that need to improve, like the defensive aspects that we've spoken about. I think this year he's probably. I think I've probably seen a maturity in him as well as a person and as a player. And he's spoken about this before. It's really kind of the first time that he's been away from Manchester for a prolonged period of time. And so he's kind of been thrown into it in that regard. And I think you've seen him grow in confidence, in personality as well. And actually, there's a lot more of him now barking instructions to other people compared to maybe what it was at the start of the season. So I think it's been a really good experience for him, part sort of the future and look in the present. I think for what he wanted to come to Norwich City and do, he has done really. Like I say, I think if he was to return to Carrow Road as a Manchester United player, as a player of another team, I think he would. I think he'd be applauded by supporters. So I've definitely seen an improvement. I think Manchester United will be pleased with how it's gone, and I think Norwich City will be pleased with how it's gone, and Brandon Williams will be as well.
Yes, that's great to hear. Just wanted to ask one more question. Really, you mentioned Keane as well. That with the likes of Luke Shaw and Telles. Having the seasons really, especially Luke Shaw like he has, do you think that Brandon, with the experience that he's gained, could perhaps slot at that left back for United if he was to stay here rather than come back to you or somewhere else?
Yeah, I guess as we said, it might be up to Eric Ten Hag's judgment of him, and I suppose the judgment of the players who at the moment are in front of him. But he's got that personality that I don't think you could ever bet against him, so to speak. I think he is somebody who will fight and will show a lot of his to work his way into the team, and if he can do that, and if he's given an opportunity, then you'd probably fancy him to take it. So it's a really interesting one, that actually. But I think if he's given a chance, he's not the sort of person that will pass it up. I think he will grab it with both hands, and ultimately, I think the type of player he is and the type of football that Erik ten Hag wants to play, and we've seen from his Ajax team that he likes young players. He wants to develop players. He wants to play a progressive style of play. Well, all of those would suit Brandon Williams if he's willing to give him a little bit of time to develop in that position, I think. So, I think there is definitely an opportunity, and there is a scenario that I can see that pans out where Brandon Williams is playing first team football for Manchester United next season.
It's very interesting you say that. Look, there's a lot of young players coming through, so it'll be interesting to see, especially in the full-back areas, what happens, because he can play right back as well. So, and Ethan Laird is having his own injury problems at Bournemouth at the minute. So, if you look at that and you look at Wan-Bissaka and Dallow's form, Williams does have a chance in both sides of the pitch. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens if and when Erik ten Hag does come into Man United. Connor, I want to touch on this Saturday's game, because obviously we mentioned kind of off camera and kind of just at the start of the show that they're the two most probably outformed teams if you look at the form guide in the league at the moment. Coming to Old Trafford this weekend, obviously, Man United have their particular problems at the minute. A lot of teams seem to be very easy. We seem to be very easy to play against at the minute, and we're having problems at the back. I seen Norwich today on social media did poke fun at Harry Maguire today, as well. When you look at kind of United's form, I suppose the dysfunctional nature of our team at the minute, and obviously there's so much unrest at our football club at the moment. Do you maybe look at this game at Old Trafford this weekend as an opportunity to maybe go there, nick 3 points, and maybe try help your fight for survival at the minute? Because as you said, you're 7 points behind with 7 games to go. Obviously, Everton are just above in 17th. Obviously, Burnley there as well, and Watford. Like, do you look at this game United and seeing kind of how recently teams have come to Old Trafford and got something out of there? Like, do you look at that and say this is probably a massive opportunity to get 3 points and maybe, I suppose, be a confidence building exercise for kind of, I suppose, the more important games to go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a little bit of a free hit for Norwich, to be honest, because like you said, I don't think they travel to Old Trafford particularly with the fear that they would have a decade ago, where you'd kind of be travelling on the team bus or in the car, and you'd have your fingers crossed that your goalkeeper is going to have a wonderful afternoon and that the goalpost is going to stay standing and the bounce of the ball is going to go your way. Now, I think there is genuine belief that you can go to Old Trafford, play this Manchester United team and get a result. And like you say, that's probably symptomatic of where Manchester United as a football club are at the moment, and where the frustrations with the fans are at the moment as well, because I think you get the sense that if you go there and keep it tight or score the first goal in the game, that the atmosphere will turn and you can use that in your favour. The one thing I would add is that the same thing works for Norwich. If Manchester United get the first goal early, then it can really kill them, because what they're not good at is chasing games. So it feels like Norwich will need to keep themselves in it for as long as humanly possible. Look to frustrate everybody. Look to frustrate the Manchester United fans, the Manchester United coaching staff, and the Manchester United players. And if they can do that, then I think there will be opportunities that present themselves, and they will have chances to try and nick a goal and nick a result. They vastly improved last week against Burnley on the counter attack. They had 5 and they resulted in 5 shots, which is a massive uplift in anything that we've seen this season in terms of attacking output. So I think the feeling is that if Norwich can replicate what they did against Burnley, albeit they're going to need to be tighter and probably get elements of luck as well. And I think there's probably a part of me that is expecting a Manchester United response after what we saw last weekend. So they may need to weather the storm a little bit as well. But I can absolutely see a situation where Norwich City go to Old Trafford and win the game, which would have been completely alien, as I said, a decade ago or even a few seasons ago. So it's about using that opportunity and actually using that negative energy inside Old Trafford to their advantage, I think. And ultimately, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of yellow and green scarves as well in the home end because of the protests. So who knows? It may end up feeling like a home game for them.
I was just going to move on to Max Aarons, actually, a player that obviously has been heavily linked with Spurs. You were talking obviously about a low block team. I think Norwich probably will sit back and look to get us on the counter, and we've struggled against that, but we've also struggled a huge amount down the right-hand side defensively and left at times. Luke Shaw not so bad as Dallo or whoever that might be at right back. At left back, sorry. But Aaron's, he's obviously an incredibly good player going forward. Could he be a player in particular that could look to damage us on that left-hand side, our left-hand side?
Yeah, I think so. I guess the major point is if he plays, really. He's just come back from a hamstring injury that meant he had to pull out of the England under-21 squad from the last international break. He was actually out for 5 weeks, but because Norwich didn't play for 3 weeks, he only really missed Brighton. I spoke to him today, funnily enough. He was doing a signing session just in the local area. I went to chat to him afterwards. It feels like he's in a good condition, but actually Sam Byram has been playing there instead, who is probably a different type of fullback. He's more defensively minded, and Norwich's right side, they do lack kind of a natural winger. So last Sunday they played Kieran Dow there, who is a bit more of a technical midfielder. He's not someone with pace who looks to stretch teams. He wants the ball to feet and will look to try and create opportunities with his kind of technical qualities rather than pure pace. So maybe from what you've said there, it could be likely that maybe we see Milo Rashica, who is a pacey winger, Kosovan international, played for Werder Bremen in the Bundesliga last season, who maybe could play down that side in the absence if Aarons doesn't come back in. But also what I would add is, as we spoke about with Brandon Williams, since Smith has come in, those fullbacks have been a lot more pragmatic, a lot more conservative than they were under Daniel Farke. So they are less involved now with what Norwich City do from an attacking perspective. So even if Aarons was to start, I wouldn't necessarily say that he's going to really cause problems. But still, obviously, there's still, when the opportunities present themselves, they can go and get involved. It's just not as likely or not as often as it was under Daniel Farke. But given how Sam Byram has played since he came into the team, which it's been solid enough defensively, apart from trying to play a completely different sport against Brighton when he handballed it inside the area. And then last week when he made one mistake and gave the ball away to Dwight McNeil that led to Cornet's chance at the far post that he missed. But beyond that, he's been really solid and really sturdy. And I think actually the way that Dean Smith plays, there's probably an argument to say that Sam Byram is maybe better suited to that than Max Aarons is. So, yeah, personally, I would be surprised if Max Aarons was starting the game on Saturday.
I hope he doesn't start. I'm going to be honest. I hope he doesn't, because I think
I really rate him. Actually, he's excellent.
Yeah, I think he's a good player. And like when we're looking at a couple of right backs there a couple of years ago, he was on our shortlist, and I don't know, like you look in like scouting department, we scouted 87 was it right backs. We end up with one that can't cross the ball. So it's kind of it's one of them. It's one of them. I think Aaron's in Ralph Rangnick's system would actually work quite well. If he was in our current system at the moment, with our fullbacks bombing on. But yeah, he's definitely one player I hope, because obviously sometimes Alex Telles can overcommit as a left back, and I think if Telles plays, we could be caught there. So I hope there's a more defensive minded right back playing for Norwich this weekend. But at the moment, we spoke about United, and we spoke about kind of the unrest at the football club. Obviously, form hasn't been great, I suppose. Since November this season, it's kind of been up and down. Obviously, Solskjaer got sacked. Ralph Rangnick has come in, hasn't really steadied the ship, and it looks like we're all but nearly out of the race for the Champions League. It's kind of up and down whether even we're going to make the Europa League at the minute. From the outside looking in, obviously there's been a lot of problems at the football club this season in general, and obviously, look, there's news breaking Eric Ten Hag may be the one to come in and obviously succeed under Solskjaer as permanent Manchester United manager. But from the outside looking in, what do you make of the situation at Manchester United at the moment?
Yeah, where to start, really? I mean, I'll probably try and compare it to a situation that maybe Norwich had a few seasons ago. And obviously, it's on a completely different scale because the clubs are completely different in terms of where they challenge and what they compete for. But back in sort of 2016, 2017, Norwich City got relegated from the Premier League, as they do. And they had a lot of players who were kind of getting on a little bit, on quite a lot of money, but had been at the club for a little while. Players like Russell Martin, Cameron Jerome, you could go on, really. Wes Hoolahan, another one of those. And actually, it kind of felt like the connection that the fans had to the team was evaporating. Everyone was kind of feeling quite apathetic towards the team and the club, and didn't really know what direction it was travelling in. Again, I kind of see a lot of similarities between where Manchester United are at the moment and where the fans are at to where Norwich were at in that moment in time. They didn't bounce back. They didn't yo-yo as sort of they've done. Alex Neil was the manager. They sacked him. And then actually they almost reset the whole football club. They appointed a sporting director in Stuart Webber, and they ran the club in a completely different way. Changed the manager role to a head coach role. There was less power involved throughout the club. And that created and really created this sense of culture around the club and a sense of identity around the club. They had a playing style. They recruited to that playing style, but they didn't have vast amounts of money to do it. And actually, in that first season, had it not have been for the goals of James Maddison, they'd have probably been relegated to League One. They weren't. They finished mid-table in the Championship, but they had a £20 million hole they had to fill. And James Maddison went to Leicester. To fill that, the next season they recruited again, signed Timu Pukki on a free, signed lots of players for not very much money, and assembled a squad that won the Championship and had a wonderful connection with the fans, a really strong playing style, and that people felt really connected to and really enjoyed watching. So that's kind of where I see Manchester United are at the moment, where Norwich City were in that cycle, where it almost feels like they need a reset of everything, of the squad, of the coach. They need to bring in a sporting director. There needs to be an identity installed in the club. They need to say, this is how Manchester United are going to play. We're going to sign players who play that style of play. And they might not be the ones that sell the most shirts, or they might not be the biggest names in the world. But when they function as a collective, they actually represent a Manchester United side that the fans want to see and that the fans can buy into. And that might mean, like Norwich, you have a year of transition where it's a little bit stodgy and it doesn't really work, and a coach is kind of embedding their philosophy. But actually, over time, it gets to a stage where they are competing again. And so I think there needs to be now this move away from what we've seen, where the focus is on commerciality, selling shirts, making money, onto the sporting side of the football club and how they build that up again. Because, you know, you guys are Manchester United fans, so you know this more than me, but it feels like it's quite an unloved part of the club almost. It's kind of been forgotten about, really, the playing side and what it means to play for Manchester United and what that looks like. That's what it feels like it needs to get to me. And actually, I think you look at what Liverpool and Manchester City have done. They did something very similar. They appointed coaches, had a style of play in mind, recruited to that style of play, and then built it up over the years. And they've had to be patient with that. And there's a lot of pain associated in that as well. Sometimes you have to go backwards before you go forwards. But I think ultimately that is where Manchester United need to go. And that's certainly how I see it externally as well. It feels like there needs to be more football people around the table, and there needs to be an actual long-term plan that isn't just, oh, Ronaldo's available, should we sign him for lots and lots of money? Not saying that's a bad decision, but it doesn't show smart strategy if that's not what your long-term plan was, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what I do.
You're absolutely right. And I think there are a lot of similarities there. And you kind of hit the nail on the head in particular, where we seem to go for very commercial players every season. Always a big name, always one that's going to get shirts. And Ronaldo was one of those players.
Right, just come in on that, Mark. That week was some buzz, though, weren't it? When we re-signed them.
It really was. But yeah, I mean, there's fours and against, and I can see everybody's point on that. And again, it was another thing for the Glazers. You know, we needed a midfielder. We need two now. We weren't going to get that, so we'll appease the fans with the return of one of the greatest players that's ever played, which is, of course, amazing at the time, but probably not really what we needed. But yeah, just one final question for me, really. It sounds a very similar situation, and I'm pleased Norwich have been able to get themselves out of that situation. But do they have owners and a board that care about the club more than maybe what the Glazers do for United?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, because in many ways it's kind of the opposite. So they really care about the club. They're owned by Delia Smith and Michael Wynne-Jones. Everyone's obviously familiar with Delia, but they have a real love for the club. They're 80 years old and they still travel. They'll still be at Old Trafford on Saturday, for example. They really love it, but actually they don't have the deepest of pockets. I'd argue maybe with the Glazers it's the other way around. They have deep pockets, but don't really feel the connection. So that means Norwich have to run themselves in a different way. They try and be self-sustainable, and the idea of that is the owners don't actually put money into the club. It is really their revenue is generated by player sales, which is why they play lots of young players and why they don't spend £80 million every transfer window. They don't want to be in debt. They don't want to run the club at a loss. They want to be profitable. They want to be self-sufficient, and they want to sustain themselves within that, which I think is a very admirable, very moral way to run a football club. Maybe the argument is that you can't really do that in modern football because you're kind of swimming against an immoral tide, really, where football clubs are running themselves into debt. The majority of football clubs lose money every month, and that's, we could get into a whole debate around the finances involved in football. Norwich don't have that, so I think there's already an argument to say that they are probably competing way above their ceiling at the moment. I mean, there are clubs who are in League One who have richer owners than Norwich City have at the moment, and they have I don't like using the word poorest because they're not poor, but they're certainly the least wealthy owners in the Premier League, and they would be in the Championship as well if they got relegated. So really, they operate in the way that they do because they have to, because it's the only choice, because there isn't someone who's going to pitch up on a unicorn willing to pump money into the club for the sake of pumping money into the club, So yeah, they care about the club, and Norwich City are very, very it's very good that they have owners like that. I think actually, if you asked a lot of Norwich fans, they'd rather have Delia and Michael, who don't have the deepest pockets, than someone who does have deep pockets but doesn't have the care, love, or association with the club over a long period of time that they do. So it's almost the reverse of the Glazers, but equally there is fan frustration from that. There is kind of the frustration that Norwich yo-yo all the time, that they can't keep themselves afloat in the Premier League, and that there are fans who feel they do need more investment. So I think ultimately, what do fans want? They want to see teams winning football matches, and if they're not, then ultimately an inquest into everything else starts, and that's exactly the same at Norwich City. Even though, as we've spoken about, there's a lot to admire about the way that they exist as a football club, I think.
100%. But look, I think the self-sustaining model is always a good one, really, because we see sometimes in football where morally sometimes this money gets put into the wrong places. So like to see Norwich become self-sustainable, that's good, because then that way, look, at least from a financial side of things, you look at like the Derby, Bury, look at clubs like that where stuff happened where they've gone in the wrong direction in terms of the financial side of the club. Norwich being self-sustainable is being smart. They're getting young players. They're selling them on for decent fees. Like you obviously know the likes of Madison and Aaron's. Obviously, Aaron's hasn't gone yet, but I dare to say there may be someone in for him for a good £30 million. I know Matt was in the comments and said Everton are linked with a move for Max Aaron's next season as well. So it's good to see that Norwich are self-sustainable. I think United are self-sustainable to the extent that the Glazers actually haven't put any money in. Any money United spend is what we generate through our revenue streams in terms of our commercial side of the football club. So when you look at that perspective, there's two final ones for me, Connor. Just obviously, before we get your prediction on the game, just your final prediction. What do you make of the news of Erik ten Hag potentially coming into Manchester United, and what do you think about his body of work at Ajax? Do you think, when you look at this model at United, do you think he's the right fit for the manager's job?
I have to be honest, I think unless, as I spoke about earlier on, unless the structure changes, I think it's going to be very difficult for one man to come in and completely change the fortunes of Manchester United. I think it needs to be a structural change, and I think Ten Hag would need to be part of changes elsewhere, rather than him simply being kind of seen as maybe the man to guide them out of the mess. I think he needs to be part of the solution, not the whole solution. But I mean, you look at his body of work at Ajax, he's done tremendously well in terms of building that club up. They're now arguably one of the best in Europe with very, very limited resources in comparison to other clubs. The football's progressive. He progresses young players. You can see a lot there that chimes with what Manchester United want to do. My fear is, again, that, as we spoke about earlier, the control isn't there that maybe he needs, or the people aren't brought in around him that need to be, and the overall football strategy fails again, and Manchester United are kind of stuck where they are now, which is not really going forward, and other teams are overtaking them. So yes, I think he is the right man, and I think there's plenty to admire about him as a coach. I think he he's a brilliant coach. He develops players, he improves players. But there's also a part of me that fears that maybe the overall structure at Manchester United will actually hinder him and prevent him from succeeding. So I think until that side is addressed and there are some signs that actually there is going to be a sporting director, or there are going to be people in footballing position. I know you've got Darren Fletcher and John Murtough and people like that. But I think unless there is someone sole sporting director above him who can kind of do that, and they recruit to the style of play that he wants, and crucially he's allowed to embed what he wants to embed, then it is going to be an uphill battle for him, I think. But I don't see any reason, if all of those things do come to pass, and Paul Mitchell I think is an excellent shout as someone who could come in as a director of football at Manchester United and make a real difference. To be honest, I think they could do a lot worse than someone like Stuart Webber, given his body at work at Norwich, even though it's maybe not been particularly great this season. There are others, of course, sporting directors out there, but it feels to me like it needs to be Ten Hag and someone else to really sort of steer Manchester United on the sporting side, and they need to be given kind of the freedom to do that. So that's kind of what I hope it will be. But as a coach, I don't think there's any arguments with his CV. And I think actually in terms of the candidates that were spoken about, he is probably the best one available at this moment in time, albeit it's going to be very difficult, I think, for any coach. I mean, Thomas Tuchel is a world-class coach, for example, and he's struggling to get close to Liverpool and Manchester City. So I think it's going to be tough for anyone to do that until those two coaches move on. But I think United, in a similar way, many ways to what Arsenal have done, need to reset it with Ten Hag in charge and now give it a period of time where he can build up the club, hopefully with someone who shares his footballing visions.
Definitely. I think there's definitely a 2-3 year grace period that he does need. And I think there's definitely massive rebuilding. And as you mentioned, like I think director of football is very important. And obviously that structure is in place for him to succeed, because I think if he doesn't have the structure, as you said, it's a massive ask for him to succeed at United. But just your final one for you there, Connor, what's your score prediction for Saturday's game?
I really want to be optimistic, but I can kind of see all three results in many ways. I can see Norwich going to Old Trafford, frustrating them, nicking a goal on the counter, coming away 1-0 winners, and really compounding the frustration that they feel. I can see, given obviously what we've spoken about the lack of confidence and maybe both teams kind of needing a result for their own morale more than anything else, I can kind of see a 0-0 draw as well. And I can also see a situation where United show a response, are really willing to attack them and absolutely thump them. So if I was going to be pushed for one of those, I'll try and be optimistic and go for the 0-0 draw. I think that would keep Norwich ticking along. It would be 5 points from 9, which, given their predicament, isn't the worst thing in the world, and would probably actually give them a lot of confidence heading into what would it be, the last 6 games, where I think realistically Norwich fans are looking at it and saying they probably need to win another 5. So that's kind of Leicester levels from what they did from their great escape. So really they need a win. I think they might lose it, but I'm hoping that it will be enough for a draw. I think a 0-0 at Old Trafford would be much appreciated by Norwich fans.
I don't think I could take another 0-0 at Old Trafford, especially after that walk for weeks.
I can't disagree with you. I think it's probably myself going to be a 1-1 draw. I don't think United are ready to bounce back this season. I think in their minds, the players' minds, and I don't think they're ready to try and improve necessarily. If I'm brutally honest, and I think that Norwich are obviously desperate to get the points at the moment, and I really can see them coming away with more than just a point. We'll see.
Be interesting to see, and we will, if Norwich do win, Connor, we'll have to get you back on the podcast to talk about the game itself and whatnot. But Connor, thanks very much for coming on this evening. It's been an absolutely fantastic chat. Great to get your insight on your own club. It's always great to hear kind of opposition fans talk about kind of their clubs and do what's going on there, because I suppose sometimes for us, especially this season, we're sick of talking about Man United. We're absolutely sick to the teeth of it. So it's kind of great. It's kind of refreshing to hear, Joe, obviously there's someone else's club and kind of what's going on. So thanks very much for giving us your insight, and obviously in what you do as well, in your work as well. And guys, also don't forget to smash like the video, hit that subscribe button. We will have our fan preview tomorrow, where we will have our full panel of United fans delve into the tactical side of the game. And also we're talking about the Eric Ten Hag talks as well. So that'll be live tomorrow at 8 p.m. So do check that out. And also, guys, look, do catch us over and talk the Devils this Saturday as well, immediately after the game as well, where Marc will be hosting and we'll be chatting about the game as well. But until then, guys, thanks very much everyone for watching. Until then, guys, we'll see you next week.